My name's Eric Welander and welcome to Windy Tech, a channel all about smart home tech in the Apple ecosystem. Today we're going to talk about 11 things you should get before you start installing smart switches and 2 things you should do. So I'm no electrician, but I've installed a bunch of smart switches in this house from a variety of different brands, and I've built up a little bit of a kit that really helps make those installations go smoothly. And I wanted to share it with you guys here on the channel just to hopefully avoid a scenario where you have the breaker off, you have switch wires just running out of the wall of a box somewhere, and you realize you need something essential. You got to run to the hardware store in the middle of the install to get the job done. Now, my one tip related to that though too is that as you install switches, even if you're experienced, it's always gonna have random bumps along the way, things you don't expect. So plan for a huge amount of time before you install smart switches. Don't box yourself into 30 minutes or an hour. I would say plan for 3 hours just in case something goes really wrong. And that way, best case scenario, you finish in an hour and then you have 2 hours of time to kill to do something else productive. But you don't want to be, rushing to finish a smart switch install. With that said, let's get started with what's in my bag for installing smart switches. And I like really having a bag like this in my workshop in the garage. I can just go grab whatever random tools I need for a job and then go off and fix whatever in the house. The first thing that I really think you need, it's very essential for safety, is a circuit tester. Now, this is a really nice tool for just being able to go up to an outlet or a switch or a wire and just see if it's active with electricity. So it'll help you know if after you think you've shut the right circuit breaker circuit off, that have you actually shut it off, or is there still electricity running to that switch box somehow? So definitely an essential thing to have. Another thing that's good to have is a wire stripper. Now, I like the ones like this that have a variety of different holes on it that make it easy to strip various gauges of wire, and then this also has a cutter on it. So sometimes you might need to strip a little bit more insulation off of a wire that's on the back of a smart switch than what they've provided, and you also might need to modify some of your existing wires in the wall by, say, stripping them or clipping them into different segments depending on your situation. So it's always good to have one of these on hand because you never know when you're going to need to use it. And then related to that, speaking of modifying wiring in your home, is just having a good set of pliers, like needle nose pliers or whatever. A lot of times with older switches, the wire was connected to the switch with a screw, and then it's wrapped around the screw, and then the screw's tightened to hold it in place. And so when you're undoing stuff like that, it's nice to have pliers to just straighten out those wires, because oftentimes you'll need to then join them up with the wires on the back of your smart switch, depending on the model and type you're using. So speaking of joining those wires, oftentimes a smart switch company will supply you with a small bag of wire nuts that often gets the job done. It's not often that I need more wire nuts than what's supplied, but occasionally you do. Sometimes you're joining together more wires or thicker gauge wires than maybe these would work well for, or maybe you do need extra wire nuts for some kind of configuration you're getting done. So I recommend just having a box of these, just any kind of wire nuts on hand, just in case something goes wrong. You probably don't need a box of 150 like I have, but just enough of a variety of different sizes, big and small, to take care of whatever you need. And speaking of securing those wire nuts, I also like to use electrical tape, and then of course scissors to cut the electrical tape with my wire installs. And that way I'll just wrap the electrical tape around the wire nut and the wires that are going into it, and that just adds an extra level of insulation and makes me feel safer about putting those wires back in the wall. It's not absolutely required probably, but I think it's nice. So speaking of those wires in the wall, if you're doing an install of something like a Lutron Caseta three-way setup where you have a Pico remote, so you're closing off a circuit in a wall or something like that, you'll definitely want to label those wires so that you or future people in the home know where those wires are going. And I often like using a labeler for that. I like a computer one because my handwriting's really messy. It would be hard for someone else to read, and I will just label the wires, just print out a label and then put it around the wire. You can use an electronic one, or you could just use, say, like masking tape and a Sharpie, whatever works for you, but just something that's on that wire so that the future people know what's the traveler wire for this switch if you've closed it off and have put in a Pico remote and they want to change it out for some newfangled thing 10 years from now. Now, I always also like to bring two screwdrivers, both a Phillips head and a standard head. So a lot of the basic switch plates that aren't like the fancy Lutron Claro ones or whatever, you'll need a standard screwdriver to get those off the wall, and then to secure and to remove switches and then add your new ones to the wall, you'll pretty much always need a Phillips head screwdriver for that. So it's good to have both on hand. So speaking of those switch plates and getting them off the wall in the first place, I like to have this 5-in-1 tool on hand. I think this goes by a variety of different names depending on what region of the world you're in, but this is a really handy tool. I jokingly call it amongst family members an 100-in-1 tool, because I've used it to rip up bathroom tile. I've used it to do all kinds of things related to painting and just opening paint cans even, and with these switch plates, getting them off the wall. I can't count the number of uses I've had for this kind of a tool. So getting a good 5-in-1 tool is really nice. It really, all you need though is just some kind of slightly dull chisel to get the plate off the wall, especially if it's a really old switch plate and it's been on there for years. It can get kind of stuck in there, or especially if the previous people have painted over the switch plate, and so then there's paint kind of sealing the switch plate to the wall. That's not going to be easy to come off, and I actually ran into a problem with that recently. I was installing another fan control, Lutron fan control, in our master bedroom, and the switch plate was painted onto the wall, and I thought I had it all off. I had about 2/3 or half of it completely undone with this tool. And then I gave it a good rip, but then a bunch of paint came with it. So thankfully I was able to use a jumbo switch plate to kind of cover my mess, at least for the time being. I plan on making that a dual switch box soon, so I'm not too worried about the long-term look of leaving paint there, or lack of paint there. But it's kind of nice to have something like a utility knife as well, just if you really need to cut through some paint. It's just always good to have some kind of a knife on hand. So some of this kit you might already have in your home. Others of it, like maybe the circuit tester, you might need to run out and get, but it's a good thing to have this stuff on hand and ready to go when you're installing smart switches. And before you run out and buy your smart switches, there's a couple other things you should do. First is you should shut off the breaker and take off the switch plate, and then take the existing switch out of the wall where you want to change it, and check out a few different things. The first is, do you see a white wire in the switch box? White wires are often the neutral wire, and that's what most smart switches require. If the switch box doesn't have a neutral wire, which is more common in, say, older homes, pretty much the only smart switch that I know of that works with HomeKit that I could recommend is the Lutron Caseta wireless dimmer switch. That's the only one I know of that works without a neutral wire. The other wire you want to keep an eye out for is the ground wire. And you need to figure out, do you have ground wires in your switch box? And if not, how are your switches grounded? Mine, for example, are grounded just by the switch box itself. So having the metal and the switch attached to the metal in the switch box, it's grounded. Newer homes, you will have ground wires in the box, but older homes, you might need to do some more investigation to figure out what's the right thing for your setup. Because when you get a smart switch, that smart switch is going to come with a ground wire, and so you need to know what to do with that. Do you just cap it off and leave it just kind of in the switch box, or do you attach it to a wire? So let me know down in the comments if there's additional tools that you've loved to use for smart switch installs or you think would be really handy. It'd be great to kind of keep this list going just for us all to get better at, you know, running our own smart homes. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Really does help other people find it on the channel. Subscribe to not on the channel, like people who are on YouTube. You know what I mean. Subscribe to this channel if you aren't already. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.